We are recording. Hello, everyone. I'm John McDonald, and a happy Halloween. This episode is coming to you the week of Halloween, actually, which is a lot of fun. And so, Magnus and I decided to talk about one of the ultimate Halloween experiences that transcends country of origin, time, space, and the Burger King reality of making kids' meal toys for non-seasonal holidays. We are going to talk about the Treehouse of Horror non-continuity segment of the Simpsons television showcase spectacular. Hello, Magnus.
Hello. And if we're going to talk about continuity, I really should point out the fact is, considering The Simpsons seems to be stuck in some sort of perpetual time loop, um, I'm not sure continuity even comes close to The Simpsons universe.
Well, they've talked about this actually, is that
Mm.
it's a very specific type of storytelling. It has a very fancy name that I think they may have created for it. But The Simpsons always moves with time while keeping the characters perpetually the same age. And the Treehouse of Horror, except for 1 year, the Treehouse of Horror episodes are all outside of that continuity anyways. Um, so
Mm.
it's outside of continuity that is outside of the continuity of the universe technically. So
I mean, one could argue that horror in itself is usually depicted in an otherverse sort of plane otherwise, um, unless it's very specifically that the horror is taking place in a very realistic location to increase the sort of spine-tingling effect for the audience and the reader.
now this isn't the first anthology series in America by any stretch, but this is
Oh,
the first
yes.
time a TV show that does Halloween episodes has done an anthology, especially animated. Because when you think about Halloween episodes of Modern Family or
Mm.
Roseanne or Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place, all of those kind of live in continuity in the year they're in. In fact, shows like Two Guys and a Girl and Modern Family are rather famous for their Halloween episodes and how they weave them into the storyline of the sitcom itself. But uh, the Treehouse of Horror is a really special thing um, that a lot of people love and have opinions on, but they tend to have
Mm.
opinions on the earlier seasons. I did an informal poll among my friends,
Yes.
and almost all of the episodes they talked about loving were from the first two Tree Houses of Horror, which ironically they are on my high list that I have because I have a list of high, good, medium, low, and wasted opportunity. Um, I really went into it
Uh,
on this.
I mean, to be honest, thinking about what you've just said, I would argue that maybe the reason why your friends think of those particular episodes and tales more particularly might be more to do with like The Simpsons as a whole because of the established golden age of The Simpsons, the first 10 to 12 seasons that people really remember fondly. And then you get into, say, the mediocre part and then the modern era. Um, and the fact is, when people talk about The Simpsons and they talk about what they love about The Simpsons, it does tend to come back to the classic era, as it were.
And the episodes that people talked about mostly were ones that have been quoted for a long time. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, don't blame me. I voted for Kodos from the Citizen Kang, which is not on my list. So Citizen Kang is number 19 on my list. Clown
Mm.
Without Pity, which is the Twilight Zone Talking Tina episode. Clown Without Pity for me actually comes out at number 20. And the thing people like about this episode is actually when Homer has the um, Frogurt conversation with the mystical Asian guy.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
so really, it's not about the show itself; it's about what happens before he gets Evil Doll.
Mm.
And people also really like "Hungry Are the Damned" from the first one, which is the it's another Twilight Zone parody where they're gonna eat people. Like they give a cookbook about they give a book about peace to the people of Earth, and they translate it, and it's actually a cookbook And it's actually one of the more solid parodies. Hungry or the Damned is my number six because I think it's very clever. Um,
Mm,
but like, as much as I love Bad Dream House from the first one, there are some pacing issues. The earlier seasons kind of show that they're still trying to figure it out. The one thing I
yeah.
like about the earlier seasons is instead of having one overall director, they give individual writing credits
Mm.
about Halloween about the time of Halloween Simpsons Special number 8. They stopped doing that. It wasn't called Treehouse of Horror until season 13, by the way.
Mm.
Um, but for the first 8 or so seasons, they were giving individual writing credits for each segment, and then an individual writing credit for the opener and what's called the wraparound.
Mm.
Unfortunately, they stopped doing that, and so a lot of the later ones, I don't know who the individual writers of the segments are because they just have the director getting credit for it essentially,
Mm.
which is a little annoying when I want to do deep dive research. Uh, but based on how my list goes, quite a few of the later ones are represented really well in this list because the ability to do an anthology, the ability to have to do like a 10-minute piece really showcases what The Simpsons did well. The idea of satire, the idea of irony, the idea of wordplay, the idea of kind of taking a pot shot at the sacred cows of
Mm.
Americana. Those
Yeah.
are all really represented in the Halloween specials, and they mean a lot to a
Mm.
lot of people. When people think of the golden age of The Simpsons, they tend to think not necessarily of this, but of the work that these episodes do.
Mm. Indeed. And just thinking about it, I mean, let's let's go right back to the beginning. The Simpsons came out in 1989. Um,
1989, and its
which
first episode is
is
a Christmas episode, by the way, which is why
so.
Treehouse of Horror doesn't start until season two.
Mm. So already, well, just a minor point on that. So already we're establishing that the Simpsons have a liking for honoring the holidays and such. And I think some of the favorite episodes that people have you usually are like seasonal or holiday specials. And certainly some of the most quotable stuff comes from them. Um so we mentioned you mentioned the past in the Twilight Zone. And when I was looking back and seeing some of the episodes for this, it really struck me that um, you can really tell what era the different Treehouse of Horror episodes are from just by like the popular or iconic um,
Yeah,
things that they're referencing. Um, because there's the Twilight Zone, there's Amityville Horror, um,
they did the Outer
like
Limits too, which was the
yeah.
spiritual twin to Twilight
Mm,
Zone. So the year after they did the Night Gallery opening, I think, was the year they did the Outer
yes.
Limits opening.
Oh,
Which is really
the Night
fun to
Gallery
think
opening.
about. They
Mm,
also reference things like the Omega Man, which is the
mm,
Omega Man, which was the Charlton Heston version of Last Man on Earth, which was done by Vincent Price in the 50s. And then in the 2000s, Will Smith did it as I Am Legend.
mm,
Uh, and The Devil and Homer Simpson is a reference to The Devil and Daniel Webster, even though it has kind of a different take on it. And then, of course, there's Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, which is Nightmare
yeah.
on Elm Street, which is
Which
actually my fourth favorite of all of the Treehouse of Horror segments. So, like, there's some really great stuff that is kind of new and personal Treehouse of Horror, but a lot of what they did was parody of other things.
and
Generally in a
mm,
great way. Sometimes not so much, but generally, generally in a great way.
ger-
I'll give them 90% on that.
generally in a great way, and in a way that they're able to reference cult and classic horror films and such, but still present it in a way that is watchable for family, even if it is terrifying in its own way. Um, as you mentioned, they did Nightmare on Elm Street. They did a Poltergeist one, I believe, as well. I forget the name of that episode. Uh,
So that was the one with so they did The Exorcist. They did The Exorcist, which
oh
with the
my
Pazuzu,
goodness.
which was really great. So the problem with Bad Dream House from season one, it's not really clear if
Yeah.
it's an Amityville horror or if it's just like a general haunted house of the 80s kind of thing. But I think
Mm,
generalism works with that because later in a later season where they actually have Ned become a realtor, they almost spoof that again anyways. Um, but
yes.
they've done zombie movies. They even did one of my favorite ones, which is not really a horror segment, but it's about the idea of the right to bear arms. It's the idea of a Second Amendment, and it's this really well
Mm.
done parody of kind of the cautionary tale of what would cowboys do if they had unfettered, if they were the only ones left with guns and zombie cowboys, and then one zombie German Reimark guy that seemed to have died in Springfield, which is kind of funny. So
Mm. So, um, thinking about that because there's been so many Treehouse of Horror stories, with
yes,
each
how
one
many seasons
really,
is it? So this year will be
yeah.
season 33.
Oof.
So 33 times. Actually, there was one year where it was 5 segments. So 33
Oh my
times
goodness.
3 plus 2 would be however many segments they've done, not counting the openers, which are usually written separately by a separate writer. So really, I'm bad at math. So it's 33 times 3 plus 2 plus 1 for every opener slash wraparound. So it's
Mm.
almost a show unto itself. In fact, there are some DVD archives where you can just get the Treehouse of Horror, and Disney Plus actually has a section where it's just the Treehouse of Horror episodes. So it's really it's its own
Yes.
culture within. It's like it got its own the Treehouse of Horror got its own San Diego Comic Con Monopoly game release. I think in merchandising before other Simpsons stuff happened. Um, but it's really hard to track down and it's very expensive if you ever find a copy of it. It's kind of one of my holy grail of Monopoly
It's,
games, but yeah.
uh, I mean, to be honest, you could almost argue that Treehouse of Horror has become its own brand that's quite distinct from The Simpsons while still being part of The Simpsons at the same time. Um, and I think that's because of the fact it's such an iconic blend of horror with the Simpsons' particular type of animated humor, and also because people have become so used to watching The Simpsons. I mean, Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie. Very few people will not know who they are, and then
So
seeing them written into a horror setting,
yeah.
I think it just captures one's memory.
So here's something I want you to do for me because this is a fun
Yeah.
thing to do. I want you because there are one, two, three. There are six correct answers to this. Can you
Ooh.
name? So there are 6 seasons where Treehouse of Horror is actually a season premiere of the season for that year. Which Treehouse of Horrors do you think they are?
Um, I'm gonna be honest. I really don't know if I can get any correct guesses there because I, I really don't know the episode order for The Simpsons in general, so I will not be able to tell you what they are. Um, is there a particular pattern to it?
There is a particular pattern to it, except for the
Ooh.
first one. The first one is an outlier.
Ooh. Oh, okay. Is it every third season?
It is not, but I like the way you think.
Hmm.
So the seasons where it was season opener is it was a season opener for um, season 8, so this Treehouse of Horror 7,
Okay.
and then season 12 to season 16 it was the opener every single year that year, and
Okay.
Treehouse of Horror 13, which would be season 14 of The Simpsons, was the first year they called it Treehouse of Horror. And so
Hmm.
there's a portion of time where the Treehouse of Horror actually opened the show as its strongest like season thing. Not just people expected it, but like it was some of the strongest openings of it. One of my personal favorites, Four Beheadings and a Funeral, which is a takedown of like Sherlock Holmes stuff. is actually from the Treehouse of Horror 15, which was the last year they did. Um, they did it as a season opener, but
Mm,
it's usually in the first 5 or 6 episodes of a season, just because of how they release episodes. But yeah, sometimes it starts out the show uh, for a season, which really does set a tone of The Simpsons being absurd, um, and The Simpsons kind of willing to take risks that other animated shows did, except for like Futurama, which is the other Matt Groening property. There weren't really any shows that were animated that were coming close to this kind of anthology in
mm.
construction. And Americans have like one of our favorite celebrated shows, The Twilight Zone, is an anthology series, but they didn't do separate things within each episode. Um, I can't think of
And
another show that does what Treehouse of Horror does. Not really. Even
no,
Sabrina didn't really do it this way. So
and you couldn't really argue that Twilight Zone, etc., are even close to the same vein because of the fact that The Simpsons is an established family orientated, well, older family orientated show at times, I would say. Um, it's family oriented show. It's cartoon. It has its its own um
yeah.
life outside of Treehouse of Horror, and yet you have a very well established anthology that's almost laced in with the seasons and such. Um, it's not even like a seasonal special, which you see with say Bob's Burgers and such, which I would argue almost comes the closest to what The Simpsons does, because it's like that they have established Thanksgiving, Christmas, and horror episodes. Um, Sorry, not horror, Halloween episodes.
Well, they did an Easter
um,
episode as well,
and Easter.
where the
Yes.
parents got
Uh,
schnockered on jelly bean schnapps, which is great.
but with The Simpsons, it is almost in its way its own distinct tradition now.
Yes.
Um,
It was certainly
yes.
more mainstream than something like Creepshow or even Tales of the Crypt, which it gave a
Mm,
nod to in Treehouse of Horror 17. And that was a Tales of the Crypt opening with Mr. Burns in place of the Crypt Keeper. That's
mm,
actually one of my top 5 of the openers. It's not my favorite by any means, but the elegance of Moe and the Iron Maiden,
yeah.
and the elegance of the use of Smithers as the lackey before they had really fleshed him out as a fully realized character.
Mm,
It really does give him a chance to shine. The only side character that really never got a chance to shine in a Treehouse of Horror was probably Reverend Lovejoy. I think every other character has gotten a chance to shine.
mm,
Even Ned has a
yeah.
couple of Ned has 3 Treehouse of Horror segments, including at least
Was it?
one which is on my favorites, one which is on kind of my second favorite,
Mm,
and then one which is kind of a middle of the road for me that I wanted to like more. So
mm. So just to touch upon Ed before I make another point. Wasn't his free one? He was the devil. Is that the one of them?
that's not one of them. That should be one of them.
Oh,
So he actually has 5 because in 2 of them he's no, he has 6 if you include Heck House. So he has 6. I've lied. He has
oh,
6 of them.
oh.
Yes.
I was gonna say I knew that one, and what I was gonna say was the other one when he
Yeah.
was the werewolf.
The werewolf, yes, that's the one that's my I kind of wish it
Ah,
had been better one.
mm,
I
yeah,
Italy know what you did. It's an I know what you did last summer reference, but it's
yeah.
different.
So,
So there's
mm,
there's
uh, well, sorry, you're gonna say?
I was gonna list off the ones he did, but we can talk about
Oh
Ned
no,
as a
please,
character if you
no,
want.
please. You go and list off the ones that he did.
Yeah. So there's obviously my number 18 is Heck House, which is
Hmm.
one where he turns the church into an actual den of evil and he shows the 7 deadly sins to the kids and does that lovely um, all dogs go to heaven Boschian hellscape. I really actually like that. Heck House was his. The Ned Zone, which is the take on Stephen King's, I think it's Stephen King, The Dead Zone, where the guy gets the bump on the head and he can predict the future. That's the Ned Zone. The one that I didn't like is there was a Dexter parody where Homer was getting him to kill all the people Homer didn't like. Uh, that's
Okay.
that's one of the ones of his that I didn't think was very good. Time and Punishment, which is one where there's a version of the alternate universe where he plays like the creepy overlord of Earth, and he's turning everyone kind of into Ned acolytes and causing them to smile. That's the one where Homer gets his hand stuck in the toaster and he keeps going back and meddling in the
Oh,
past. And so
yes.
I think that's a great moment for Ned because this is in one of the earlier seasons, so they hadn't really established Ned too much.
Mm,
So the idea of that neighborino before we've had the hurricane episode where he goes a little mental.
mm,
I think Time and Punishment is actually a really elegant way um, to showcase Ned because it's a different way
mm.
of looking at him, but it's still Ned. And then, of
Yes.
course, The Devil and Homer Simpson is one of the most iconic episodes
Yeah.
to me. It's actually one of the sweetest, I think, too. So,
Mm. I think we should start actually speaking about some of our personal favorite
sure.
iconic episodes in a minute. Um, one key point I want to make actually, which was brought on by a word you used before. You said elegance before,
Oh, yeah.
and I think that's something about Treehouse of Horror I've always liked. Is the fact is, um, it's able to do horror in a way that kids can watch, get very much creeped out by, because they're the ones that I distinctly remember. I remember watching as a kid and getting, somewhat terrified of some of the plots, which we'll touch on in a minute. But at the same time, they were able to write it in a way that was smart and adults could fully appreciate. Some of the best animation to me is something that's inclusive for everyone, that everyone can appreciate from different perspectives. And for the kids, they can watch it and get nicely creeped out. Adults, there's so much clever writing and so many great references. Um, I forget which opening it was. Um, I distinctly remember when Marge was doing a Halloween party for all the kids and such, and Grandpa was there and everything. Bart was dressed as the lead character from A Clockwork Orange. Now, and he even quotes him at one point, one of the characters' lines. Now, that would go over the kids' heads,
Yeah.
but it's such a great little reference they stuck in there. And the fact they were able to put so many iconic horror and thriller
Yeah.
stuff in there while still making it family friendly, I think is a triumph in itself.
And that's one of the three Clockwork Orange references they did over the years because they've also had
Ooh.
Maggie as a Clockwork character, and then they did a
Oh
Clockwork
yes.
Yellow, which is one of my least favorite segments because they try too hard to
Mm,
jam in too many references. It lacks an elegancy the other ones have. But I
okay.
appreciate Clockwork Yellow. I appreciate anything that gets more people watching Stanley Kubrick. There you go. Actually, I think we should start with the openers because they're their own segment, and we actually both share a love of Treehouse of Horror 4's Night Gallery opening. Because we
Oh,
talked about this before the episode, and I think this is a great blend of
mm,
reference and nostalgia, but also something for the kid.
yeah.
Homer going a little crazy because of the dogs playing poker painting, and then making that into a full joke, I think is great. And Night Gallery is Rod Serling's anthology series after Twilight Zone ended. And so it's not just a reference, but I think for an excellent opener, it kind of stands on its own. If you've never seen Night
Mm,
Gallery, you understand what they're
yeah.
doing, you understand what an art gallery is. And then the segments are not, they're some of the better ones that people
Yeah.
remember if you prod them a little bit. I think the Night
Mm.
Gallery opening works. Bart having to hold Maggie for one of the intro sessions because Marge tosses him off to go visit the gift shop and he's got that annoyed big brother face. I think it's really a subtle kind of great reminder you're both in and out of continuity. And I think the Night Gallery opening,
Mm,
it's still my favorite of all of the openings, I think.
mm. And it's great that they're able. I just remember all those creepy paintings in the background that again were referencing stuff. And people that watched Night Gallery will get the reference, and people that didn't, hopefully this encourages them to actually check it out.
Yeah.
And like by including references like this, it allows people to rediscover some stuff or even discover stuff afresh. And that is something I have a particular fondness for when creators do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. So I have a list of 23, which are my top 23 episodes, and it took me a long time to figure out because there are some I was surprised but wanted to fight for. So before I jaw on into my first one, what is your kind of the one that you want to talk about? The segment that brings you kind of the most Halloween joy, as it were.
The most the most Halloween joy.
Well,
Yeah,
whatever
are
you
we
call
talking
it,
joy or
this is my Halloween joy thing. So whatever brings you, whatever one you really want to talk about. So
let's see. Um, I think what I'll do is I'll name a few that I've always had a particular fondness for various reasons. And just leave it there. And then if it comes up in your list, we can discuss them in a bit more detail when we come to that.
okay.
So in terms of n childhood nightmare-inducing fuel, for some reason, Nightmare Cafeteria really stuck with me as a kid. The and it's a very childhood fear of like people that you trust, your teachers, the staff at your school and such, suddenly turning on you and you having this fear for your life. I do remember actually as a kid, I had a nightmare about it, like a very vivid one, all about the grinder and everything. Um,
The
and
Gooify-O-Matic that has the Gooify set,
yes,
the giant Hamilton Beach blender they have on the floor of the factory for some reason. It's so good.
it is. Um, so that stuck me with that, and I think that's one of the ones where they may have been referencing something, but similar to the haunted house from the first episode, it may have just been they were tapping into like a primal, well-established fear
Yeah,
as well. Haunted house, um, crazy teachers, and cannibalism, etc. Um, and just sort of making their own original tale.
yeah.
Um, so that's for fear-inducing. For visual reference, Homer Pi 3, I think that's what it was called, or is it Homer times
Homer
3?
cubed. Homer
Homer
cubed.
cubed, sorry.
No, you're
Um,
fine.
because that was the first time I think as a kid I ever saw 3D graphics really in effect. And the fact that they blended it so seamlessly between cartoon to 3D graphics to live action at the end,
Yeah.
um, that really stuck with me as something I'd never seen done before. Um, and to be honest, I haven't rewatched that episode recently, but it gets me itching now to go back to it again. And
And
lastly,
Homer
sorry.
Cubed has my favorite
Mm.
closer. The erotic
Ooh.
cake shop thing is I think one of my favorite closers. And if you watch the credits to that episode from Treehouse of
Mm.
Horror 6, by the way,
Mm.
um, all the people on the street in the live action portion were hired actors too. So they didn't just like have some poor schmuck in a green screen suit walking down Santa Monica Boulevard. It's actually probably my favorite closer, which is not something that most of the closers are not that great, but I think Homer Cubed is probably the best final segment, closing segment that they have done probably in years.
Mm.
Um, Nightmare Cafeteria is actually my number one favorite, and I'll talk about that for a moment. But I want to make
Yeah,
sure you get your
th-
list out before I
th-
go rambling on.
that's quite all right, sir. I'll name the one last one, and this is something we'll probably discuss. In terms of the most memorable segment to me, um, it's probably the one that, you know, it's such a clear reference, and they pretty much like copy the film in many regards. But there's something very Simpsons about it in every aspect. The shinning. Um, and that, I think that's on your list, so we'll discuss that in a moment.
Yeah.
But let me just say one thing. Poor groundskeeper Willie. The poor man didn't not cut a break in that episode.
It
Oh,
was
his
the
whole
running gag throughout that whole episode because in every story
mm,
he got like hit in the back with something and murdered. It was actually something Family Guy copied many years later when they were doing
mm.
their fairy tale anthology. But like I
Ooh,
really
yeah.
there's a really great because the last one groundskeeper Willie said, "I'm just not very good at this," as he's like falling over dead for the third time. And I love how aware that the Simpsons were of the gag, but they
Yeah,
stopped before it became too much. Like they were like, we
yeah.
can do this one, it's a segment, and then the third one, we have the ability to reference it because it's such an absurd thing to have him die all three times. And I think it's a
Um,
great awareness that they had of what
yeah.
they were doing.
On a bit of a tangent before we go into your list, thinking about Groundskeeper Willie, um, I still to this day, I'm not sure how I feel about his occasional moments when he rips his clothes off and shows that underneath he's got the physique of an Olympian.
I'm not
And
mad about it. Like
oh, I'm not mad about
they're
it. I just like
it's yeah.
to this day, I still recall very very vividly the episode when Homer becomes a grease baron for some bizarre reason, and groundskeeper Willie rips off his clothes to the lunch lady Doris and says, "Lard me up, woman."
And she
It
just
just
goes, okay, and then proceeds to do so. Because what else do
yeah
you say in that time?
yeah.
Um,
Anyway,
yeah.
on to the list, sir.
No, I love that so much. That's so great. Okay, so I guess I'm just so before I get to my list, I want to give a nod to my other favorite openers and then my favorite horror episode that's not in this continuity. It's very strange.
Mm,
So I also my least favorite season, Treehouse of Horror 30, has my second favorite opener, which is the one based on The Omen, where Maggie
mm.
is the day main character. And the opener is so great, and it just goes downhill from there. Um, and my third favorite opener was the kind of CGI claymation. It's called Sweet Hereafter from Trace of Horror 28.
Mm.
And this is the one where they're all candy and they end up on the high shelf eating the Easter bunny made out of chocolate. Um, I think it's really great. Having Grandpa be senior mints and have him being eaten and having Bart be Butterfinger and mentioning how they don't have a Butterfinger contract and they can disparage it. I think Sweet Hereafter is a really great opener. Um, there's one that I really like that I will not talk about because I found out um, the artist of that particular opener has allegations of grooming. So
Ooh.
there's one kind of good one that I think everyone probably likes, but I will not be talking about that one with the special song that got made up because that artist is not a good person. But I'm aware of that, so that's
Mm,
all I'm going to say about it. I would also like to give a shout out to probably my favorite anthology episode they did, Thanksgiving of Horror. I didn't write down what year this was, but there's this really great thing where the Agabalipto, which is an apocalypto take on, except the Simpsons and some of the other Simpson characters are turkeys, and it's not a silent episode like Hush, like the Pilgrims talk. But I actually think a Gobalipto, if it was a Treehouse of Horror segment, would probably be in my top three. Because there's something visually stunning about it. It's very elegant in both what it parodies and
mm.
on its own merit. And it's also probably the most accurate to how the Pilgrims actually were when they first came to America. And I just think it's great. And I couldn't not mention Thanksgiving of Horror because I think if you do a list about Treehouse of Horror, it's not technically a treehouse, but it has a lot of those distinct hallmarks. And I think it should be on Treehouse of Horror list for anyone
Mm.
doing one of these in the future. Um,
Um, I mean, the thing is, with true, the just a small point, horror in general is meant to unnerve you,
yeah.
and I know that Thanksgiving is a very important holiday for a lot of Americans. So something that sort of like unnerves you over something that you feel a strong positive connection for, or something that you do celebrate, I think it can be grouped in then with the Treehouse of Horror because that's what it's intending to do.
Also, here's a little American secret. We don't actually like Thanksgiving. We like the idea of Thanksgiving. but the amount of episodes where it's like a sitcom where people secretly hate Thanksgiving until they sit at the table and they're having the turkey. That's how it is. Like we like Thanksgiving in hindsight. I like Thanksgiving because I basically eat a turkey, deviled eggs, and croissants and hang out by myself. But a lot of people put like familial identity on it. That makes it
Mm,
10 times worse. So that's something to discuss in November, though, and we will get there.
yeah.
So Nightmare Cafeteria is my number one. It has been that way since I saw it in Treehouse of Horror 5, which is the season it's in. It's season 6, so it's Treehouse of Horror 5. And I like this because it has kind of that Are You Afraid of the Dark, the faculty kids against the teachers feel.
Mm.
I like that it subtly slides into cannibalism. It doesn't start out there, it really ramps up to 100. The jokes about Jimbo, sloppy Jimbos, and Ooter Broaden. I think the
Mm.
Ooter Broaden, there's a little Ooter in all of us line, is hilarious.
It. Oh
Um,
yeah.
it's so good. It's so Simpsons, and like if I had friends that quoted Simpsons more, I would probably give them sausages and call them Uterbraten and get a chuckle. And then Uter later appears on a wall of spies for the not as great spy episode takedown they did for Jurassic Horror segment. But Nightmare Cafeteria is great for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, but it's also great I think because it doesn't have to reference something and it still works. It's
Mm.
still very strong because they understand the tropes of Halloween in Treehouse of Horror.
Yes.
They can do the shorthand in a way that's elegant, in a way that people understand. Island of Dr. Hibbert doesn't have to be exactly like Island of Dr. Moreau for people to get it. I don't think Island of Dr. Hibbert's on my list, um, but it's like Island of Dr. Hibbert doesn't have to be exact beat for beat for people to
Yep.
understand what it is. And it
Mm.
works, and it makes me happy. And so after Nightmare Cafeteria, my second pick is actually a little controversial, I think, because this is during the period of time in The Simpsons when people were really kind of down on it and thought that it
Mm.
should have been canceled. Um, and so mine is from Treehouse of Horror 19, and this is their Peanuts takedown. It's the Great Pumpkin Millhouse. I like the
Okay.
idea of taking this absurd holiday character like the Great Pumpkin, parodying it, and then turning it completely on its tail and showing that it could be an evil thing, and having Millhouse, a traditionally weak character,
Mm.
um, weak in quotes, be kind of this avatar for saving everyone, except for when he tries to offer Tom Turkey a turkey dinner. So I
Mm.
think it's not just a great parody of a classic holiday that I love. It's a Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. It's a Grand Pumpkin Millhouse is even on its own merits kind of this wonderfully absurd and funny. They use a lot of the same beats as the Peanuts, which I really like. They have the
Mm.
kids rhythmically dancing in time the same way they do in the Peanuts Christmas special. Um, and the idea of the people that get eaten by the pumpkin, Homer doesn't want to live on the outside anymore, so he tries like living in the pumpkin shell. Um, I think Instagram Pumpkin Mill House is I don't know if it's underrated, but it's definitely one where I was surprised how much I wanted to talk about it and fight for it in the time that we
Mm.
had.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't honestly know if I've seen that one, in all honesty, so
Uh,
it doesn't ring a
Marge
bell.
Marge plays the trombone throughout most of the episode.
Mm.
She's doing kind of the idea of the parents and the peanuts like a womp womp womp, and so they have her playing a trombone throughout most of the episode to stand in for those parents. Also, the Halloween pumpkin is secretly racist against yellow pumpkins, which is a weird and hilarious takedown of Americana in a lot of ways.
Mm.
It also is one of the showcases, like Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, of how The Simpsons can do different animation styles, but they choose to do a specific style
Mm.
because it doesn't look like other even Treehouse of Horror segments. And I think it really succeeds in looking like itself, which is a weird thing to say, but it looks different visually, and the impact is so successful It's one of the ones just because I adore It's a Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, and I think It's the Grand Pumpkin Millhouse is an affectionate parody of that in a way that only The Simpsons could do. Because not all
Mm.
parodies have to be hilarious, and this is like an affectionate parody where it also has humor, which I appreciate.
Okay. You've convinced me that this might be well worth checking out on my Halloween watch list after
Yes,
this recording.
I would also recommend that if you're looking to do specifically parody with Simpsons, a shout out to Dial M for Murder or press the pound sign to return to the main menu, which is
Mm.
one of my kind of wanted to discuss but not on my top list. And this is the pitch perfect parody of every Hitchcock tension movie ever, but done with Bart and Lisa. And it's done in this amazing grayscale, um,
Mm.
which is really daring to do, especially for The Simpsons, which are known for their yellow skin tone. Um,
Yes.
so it's up there with Dial M for Murder or press the pound sign to return to the main menu,
Mm.
which is the full title of that episode. So that's my number
Okay.
two. My number three is from Treehouse of Horror 27. This is going to be controversial. BFF RIP. This is a kind of in the vein of Nightmare Cafeteria, where it's more of a general idea than it is a parody of something.
Okay.
Um, Lisa's best friend starts murdering all her other best friends out of vengeance for being forgotten. And we find out that Homer's childhood hero was Sergeant Sausage, who he ends up imaginarily eating at the end of the episode, and he spends the entire episode incredibly wasted, in his own words. I think BFF RIP is an amazing Neo Simpsons post movie um, Treehouse of Horror segment.
Mm.
Everything from Rachel's backstory to how Lisa vanquishes her, to Snowball 2 giving their life to save an unaware Marge. It has really swift beats. It spends entire 10 minutes making sure you watch the entire thing. There's not a second of drag in it. Um, and Bart being a drug mule essentially for the prison is never discussed again. But I feel like it's both in character and the most horrifying thing I've ever learned about Bart, because he just has no idea what he's doing. So BFF RIP. The gag with Dana Carvey talking at Sherry and Terry's funeral without the knowledge he was talking at a funeral is kind of amazing. Um, yes, BFF RIP from
Okay.
Treehouse of Horror 27, which means season 28, which is very confusing, but there you have it. Um, Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace is my fourth,
Ooh.
and this is from Treehouse of Horror 6. From the different animation style, the different dreams, the way that Martin dies
Oh.
as kind of the Latin wizard Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warrior character.
Mm.
Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, the Smarch calendar. I absolutely love the idea of the misprinted calendars, and there's Smarch. Um, the banality of the evil of the PTA that is the reason he dies,
Mm.
I think is incredible. Like he's burning alive as Millhouse's dad is like yammering on about spaghetti at school because he doesn't want to feed spaghetti Millhouse spaghetti twice in one day. It's just there's something about the way they craft the juxtaposition of urgency versus the banality of things that I think is really great.
Mm.
And also just putting a baby nipple on a Buzz Cola to give to Maggie to keep her awake, I think is a really wonderful choice to make. There's so much great to love, including Groundskeeper Willie turning into a giant spider bagpipe, which I've never seen done at a Comic Con, but I can only imagine great things from that costume.
Mm. Ah, well, to be honest, there'd be a lot of great cosplay options from um the Treehouse episodes alone. In fact, it almost feels like they could do the Boodlet brothers could have a Treehouse of Horror special for their
I
Dragtacular series.
I think they could, but the Treehouse of Horror generally aren't dark enough, and especially because 90% of them reference other things, it
Mm.
would be really easy to misconstrue it as something else. And the
True.
Lee brothers have done an outer space episode, which would have been an opportunity for someone to do Kang and Kodos, and they've done a witch episode and several vampire episodes. So I like the spirit, but I'm not sure in execution how well it would work. Um, there
Ugh.
is something
Could,
about the Lay brothers where I would enjoy a dash more humor, but I think that's
mm,
more on the contestants than it is on the brothers because I think the brothers
true.
understand the humor within the horror brand. But there's also a
True.
Career for Fear doc out now, which is good.
Mm.
So, A Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace from Treehouse of Horror 6. If you haven't seen it, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, I have to admit that again is one of my personal favorite episodes as well. And nothing else for the fact that the way they utilize Willie in it and actually make him terrifying rather than his usual bumbling self, and his rake as his weapon
Yes.
is
And then he
just
comes
like,
back at the end of the episode alive. So they're also spoofing the end of the Nightmare movies where Freddy never quite dies, except he
no,
becomes his inept bumbling self at the end when he's not in the dream anymore and he leaves his gun on the bus. And I just think that's so great.
yes,
I'm a
mm,
fan.
indeed. Mm,
So my number five is from Treehouse of Horror 5, and this is where Shinning falls on my list. I thought this was going to be higher, but then upon rewatch, as much as I love The Shining and I love The Shinning, it's
mm,
so close to the film. It makes me like the
mm,
Bob's Burgers crawl space episode more because it takes advantage of what The Shining is, but it changes it into
yeah.
something. I feel like The Shining is just a hair too close to the Kubrick film. And I
Mm,
think that's the thing that stops me. I do like Mo not being subtle and just being like, you need to kill your family. And I do like
yeah.
Marge stepping over him in the cooler. I like the idea that Homer is his own undoing. I even like the Jap at the Tony Awards at the end, but it feels just a little too close.
It yes, I see your point. It doesn't stop me from really enjoying this as an iconic Treehouse of Horror tale, but I do agree that it follows the major plot points from the movie beat for beat. There's no like twist or revelate. The only real twist is when they all sit down and they watch TV together and they end up freezing because of that,
Yeah,
because of
but it
TV's
doesn't
warm
always
below.
have to be a twist. Uh,
No.
but if you look at The Shining versus, say, the crawl space episode in season one of Bob's,
Yeah.
where the crawl space becomes his version of the Overlook, um, there's something where it's a little more transformative, and I think there's some great moments in it. Mr. Burns saying, "Oh, the blood usually gets off on a different floor." I think it's very clever, but but it's two beat for beat was the reason it was number five. Otherwise, it would have been higher.
Mm,
This is one of the ones where Willie does get killed. This is one of the groundskeeper Willie axe murder episodes, which I appreciate. And that is from
mm,
Tressa Horror 5. Um, Now we're going to go back in time. Treehouse of Horror 1 from season 2. Hungry Are the Damned, which is the Twilight Zone cookbook aliens eat people take down
mm,
here, and this is the one where they completely flip it, and
yeah.
the idea that there's just space dust on the book, and it keeps revealing more and more absurd things where it looks like the aliens could want to eat the Simpsons, and then they pull back from it, and they do it like four times, right up to the limit where it's gonna overcome. Um, I think Hungrier the Damned is a great early Simpsons vignette because it tells you a lot about who they are and what they represent. Because it's easy to forget in season one, season two, we didn't
Yeah.
really have a whole town. We had the Simpsons
No.
and sometimes we had the Flanders, but we really just had the Simpsons and uh, and then sometimes people that Marge almost cheated with, like the bowling instructor. Uh, but it's an early season, so there's still room to decide who they are before they get kind of pigeonholed into these characters that
Mm,
would keep them from learning things week to week. There was still a lot of possibility, and I think Hungry Are the Damned also was a showcase to introduce all of the aliens from Rigel, of which we'll only see Kang and Kodos in the future,
Yeah.
except for Citizen Kang. I think it's an excellent. You made Sirach the Preparer cry was a quote from someone that absolutely loved this episode, but they could not remember the name of it. Now, I only remember the name because I watched it last week. Hungry or the Damned is not a particularly memorable name, but the segment is particularly memorable. So
Yes. Hmm. It has to be one of the best character introductions that the Simpsons have done, actually. Actually, probably one of the only real ones they've done because a lot of the secondary characters just sort of appear
yeah,
normally. They don't get the whole like introductory episode and such. But maybe that's why the aliens remain quite memorable because of that. And also like such lovely distinctive designs.
yeah, Kang and the whole of Rigel 7, which then
Mm.
later on Futurama we get Rigel 8 where they're bipedal instead of like squid octopus characters.
Mm.
It's a great example of taking a really simple design and making it useful. The idea of, I think it's Kang that is like, and we're going to chew the fat with their glistening jaws and then find out that they were not going to eat the Simpsons.
Mm.
I think it's a really great take not just on horror but on the idea of when aliens come, are we going to hoist ourselves by our own petard? Are we capable of doing Star Trek? And the answer
Mm.
is no, we're not capable of Star Trek. We are selfish, craven beasts at the end of the day, even when we
No,
try to be our better selves.
no, don't say it's so.
I mean, it's true. And speaking of craven beasts, Lionel Hutz has a bit of a Treehouse of Horror debut in my number 7 spot from Treehouse of Horror 4. It's Devil and Homer Simpson. And this is the
Mm.
one with one of the sweet endings, as I call it. So you get a couple that have sweet endings. The one where Bart is doing the Twilight Zone episode with the kid with the cornfield. And then the Devil and Homer Simpson, which is funny, and it's incredibly sweet when we find out that Marge owns Homer's soul. And I think that is the only Treehouse of Horror fact that has not been retconned in canon. I think it's the only one that they liked so much they kept it in the series, essentially. But the Devil and Homer Simpson, the jury is hilarious. Blackbeard the pirate in a high chair, Lizzie Borden, Richard Nixon, who's not dead. Um, I think he was probably dead after this episode come out. But there's a starting lineup, I think, from a hockey team or it's like a football team. But it's
Yes, it's a hockey team.
yeah, and then the judge's death for no reason. It's really great. The Homer's head being transformed into a donut while the cops wait outside. There's a lot of really good humor in this. The only thing that makes it farther down the list is that I just like the other episodes a little bit better. But like these top
Mm.
7 for me, you could interchange them, and I'd probably
Yeah.
be just as happy with them. I think The Devil and Homer Simpson is a way to do horror, but to do that ending beat with heart, that works. And I don't know how many people actually saw The Devil and Daniel Webster or even Bedazzled, which is a couple of things this is probably based on, the idea of selling your soul. Um, I think it's a really great, elegant, the idea of Bart messing with the devil and not selling his soul is such a Bart thing too. And it makes me
Mm.
so happy.
um, and oh, you did mention the Monty Burns bit. Who is that man? Who's that man, Smithers? I like the cut of his jib. That's the Prince of Darkness, sir. He's your 11 o'clock.
Oh, it's so good. It's true. There's a lot of great stuff in that episode, and I like that it's a kind of a workplace because we don't get a lot of workplace episodes in the Treehouse of Horror canon too. So I like that it starts out there. I also like
Mm.
that Homer has an emergency donut because as a person that always had emergency candy supplies at my desk at work, I
Yes.
understand. I would not do a donut. I also would not use my emergency manual cutout for hiding that, but that's just me. I've learned
Well,
things that make Homer Homer.
you mentioned about Maggie and the um pacify the bottle gag
Yeah,
earlier, and this is The Simpsons has always been really good at visual gags. Like they use all the different ways that they have, like puns and visually, sound, everything like that. they don't necessarily need some of the best humor that they have is just what you could see on the screen, and they don't need to re-articulate it. The emergency donut really does stand out for me as a memorable moment from that particular episode.
Yeah. And
Mm.
Homer's the type of person you could see having an emergency donut, even though they provide an absurd number of donuts at his workplace. It's never quite enough. Um,
Y- Yeah, Mr. Burns complains about them all being layabouts and such, but I mean, if he wasn't like facilitating that to a
yeah,
degree,
it's a
they would.
self-fulfilling prophecy. But
Mm,
self-fulfilling prophecies aside, my number 8 is from Treehouse of Horror 2. This is the monkey paws with
yes,
with the Frogurt skit essentially at the
it
beginning of
is.
it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, no, the monkey's paw is the one where they're in Morocco inexplicably. Clown Without Pity is the one
Oh,
with the Frogurt. So this is the one where
yes.
they are inexplicably somehow in Morocco, and then Homer has to pay the $2 fee to get all the stuff out, and the monkey paw causes nothing but chaos until Flanders gets hold of it. Um, also,
Oh,
also the Simpsons Calypso album for some reason always makes me chuckle. Um, it's kind of takedown of the already burden of Simpsons merch that we were getting at this point in season 3.
yeah.
Monkey's Paw is a great episode. It's how you knew the Simpsons understood their place in pop culture history, essentially.
Mm. And there's a couple of other great little points. For example, when Lisa wishes for world peace and that backfires.
Literally,
The
because the
Simpsons.
kids' playground is made awfully out of these rifles, and like as Ralph is coming down the slide, like rifles are going off. It's so good. You can't watch that
Mhm.
much now because it
Yeah.
makes you cringe having kids so near firearms. But like at that point in time, we were still in America. We still hadn't quite succumbed to that level yet. So
Um, so with that, when the humans are being led away by the very lightly armed alien horde, the one man goes, "Before I was just annoyed with their antics. Now I want to kill them." In regards to Simpsons, so there's a great example of what you were just saying about sort of like almost like a self-awareness
yeah,
of their place and such. You were saying about like until it gets with Flanders, like the monkey paw keeps backfiring. Um, I have two thoughts on that. One thing, Maggie wishes for a new pacifier, and we don't actually see any backfire to that. And then Flanders gets the paw, and there doesn't seem to be any backfire to his wishes. Now, you could interpret that because Maggie's relatively innocent, as a baby, she and Flanders is very goody two shoes. It could be that the backfiring doesn't necessarily work against those that don't necessarily have any malice in their heart. I know you could argue that Lisa did a very selfless wish, but then she still wished for world peace from a self-centered point. Um,
well, the turkey
there's
sandwich
lots of
was a
debate to that.
little dry, so it could have been
Yeah.
nicer about the turkey sandwich. But
Uh,
that's a small point.
yes. Although I have to say, it could be we just didn't see the downside in the wishes. They left it open to
I
interpretation. It
mean,
could be so gone.
the downside of Maggie's wish was that over the rest of the seasons, from that evil pacifier, she became more craven and evil as time went on. So it was
Mm,
actually just a really long con. Is that it was a pacifier that turned her um, evil and murderous. Also, because she's had to listen to
yeah.
Goodnight Moon forever, I would be murderous
Mm,
after that. I understand. So my next one, my number 9, is probably also a little controversial. From Trust of Horror 15, I really love this. This is 4 beheadings and a funeral, and this is their kind of Scotland Yard, distant past English one, the Sherlock Holmes one, the one with lots of references to opium, which I think is really great. The eel pie gag I really love because as a fan of Great British Bake Off, I've uh, had a curiosity about eel pie ever since I found out it was a real thing. 4 beheadings and a funeral, I think, it's a weird one. It's not very frightening, um, but I actually like it on its own merits. And it makes me chuckle every time. It makes me feel good. it makes me think of you a little bit because that's where you are in the world. So yes,
Ah,
I don't know if
I
you've seen
know.
it, so I don't know if it would make you bitterly angry that I'm connecting it with you, but I think it's great. So
Oh no. If I was going to get bitterly angry about every British reference in the world, well, for one thing, that would make me very, very petty. And for the other thing, considering the amount of Americana references out there,
yes.
you would have cause to be angry too, and vice versa for everyone that has cultural references from different cultures.
I mean, but we are the center of the universe, so that doesn't hurt anything. No, I don't actually think that. But four beheadings and a funeral, it's not the scariest you're ever gonna see, but I think it's one of the funniest. It's one of the only ones where Chief Wiggum is actively a villain too. Usually he plays a very passive character in a lot of ways, or
Mhm.
a very friendly character. This is one of his villain turns, and I think it works. Also, um, Homer's character as the befuddled not villain, I think is really great. His reference to "I've never had the pleasure of a good eating apple," I think is amazing as a line, and the delivery with it makes me so sad for him. Also, there's a lot of opium in this episode. They really go heavy on the opium, which makes me worry for people in that era of Britain. But such is life.
Mm.
And then rounding up my top 10 from Treehouse of Horror 1, we actually have their ending bit with the Raven with James Earl Jones. That is not someone they hired. It sounded like James Earl Jones. That is James Earl Jones reading The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe that Homer is acting out. I think this is charming. It's a great parody. Uh, Marge as Lenore with the two picture frames, one of her and then the top of her hair
Yep.
on the side is really great. The
Yes.
gags where Homer hurts himself trying to get to the Bart Raven. And then the Bart commentary of, would have been scarier if there had been at the door, anything than nothing. I think it's such a good both commentary and loving parody, and also James Earl Jones. Who would have expected
Hmm.
James Earl Jones voicing the Raven
The
by Edgar
Raven.
Allan Poe? It's so good, and it's just so unexpected. And it was that had to have been how they knew Treehouse of Horror could go on and be something of a success. Like if it had been anybody else voicing, reading the Raven, I
Mm.
don't know if it would have worked as well.
Yes. Now that one was perhaps one of the most confusing segments to me as a kid. Um, not knowing anything about Edgar Allan Poe or The Raven, I was quite befuddled and I wasn't quite understanding what the hell was going on. Um, Maybe it's because it, I think Edgar Allan Poe is more well known in the States as opposed to here in the UK. He's not, people do know him over here, but I don't know if we read him so much
Yeah, Poe is
as
a
children or teens.
yeah, Poe is a northeast like an Americana thing. It's very much like I know Poe because I love Vincent Price and it led into Poe naturally.
Yeah.
But Poe is kind of like Alfred Noyes, The Highwayman. If you're not
Mm,
like in school having read it or getting like having it be a part of your Halloween from a young age, it doesn't necessarily mean anything to you.
yeah.
Poe is very much about atmosphere, very much a time period author, very much highly into the genres that he lived in. So,
Mm.
and then he died destitute and broke, and it's very sad.
And the thing is, the fact that The Simpsons is very much referencing the fact that, Poe's story is very much from his era, and Bart is making all these comments about the story itself, the theming of it, the pacing of it, compared to horror elements that he's seen. It's a great piece of social commentary there.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean that having rewatched it as an adult, I appreciate it for what it is. But as I say, as a kid, it was confusing, but also mesmerizing at the same time.
It's a very daring thing for a show like The Simpsons to have done. Because bearing in mind, the Raven is the ending segment of the first Treehouse of Horror in the second season.
Mm,
And Treehouse of Horror was this new thing. They weren't calling it that yet. It was still the Simpsons Halloween Special, and it had been followed before by Bad Dream House, which was more clearly something like Amityville Horror, and it had that middle segment, which was Hungry Are the Damned, which was an alien segment, and so the Raven is completely different from the other two. Also, it scares Homer senseless, so maybe they knew that adults were going to get it more than the kids, because it is pretty scary because it's about grappling with mortality and a broken heart. It really is
mm,
more for adults than it is for kids. It's a great play to do for a theater exercise if you ever need it, if you ever need a poem for that, because that's what I've
mm,
done with
hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I
Mm, sorry, go on.
no, I was just gonna run through kind of the rest of mine because I don't know if we want to spend all the time deconstructing all 23. But before I do, I want to give a shout out to School is Hell, which is from one of the later seasons, not because I love the episode so much, but because they use the song Hell is for Children, which is one of my favorite weird, not Halloween songs. So School is Hell is one of my favorite, where Bart ends up in Hell Academy, doing very well. And then I also want to give a shout out to the Genesis Tub, which is the one where Lisa grows Lutherans, essentially from I think it's a tooth or something like that, and then gets shrunken down. And I think it's one of the better sci-fi episodes they went
Oh
with it.
yeah.
So I wanted to shout those out. Those aren't on my 23, but they're like my high good line.
Mm,
So I want to make sure I get
yeah.
them in. But so I'm just going to go through this. You can stop me if you want to. So from Treehouse of Horror 8, I got the Omega Man, which has some great like zombie vibes, but they're not zombies.
Mm,
Uh, and then you've got Survival of the Fattest from 16, which is the one
mm.
where Homer and buddies get hunted by Burns, and Moe wins the lottery via lottery ticket before being impaled on a weather vane by Barney, I think it is, or Chief Wiggum. It's a really sharp beat. The ending with Marge saving Homer, I really love, with the frying pans. Survival of the Fattest, it surprised me how high it ended up on my list, but it's pretty good. From 20, from Treehouse of Horror 20, Don't Have a Cow Mankind, which is their zombie take, where Bart is the savior, surprisingly enough. And Apu gets a really great shine where he's like, I think he's a vegan, he says, and so he didn't try the tainted burger, but as a convenience store employee, he was armed to the teeth, and I think that's just great. Sad commentary, but also hilarious. My number 14 from Treehouse of Horror 13 is Fright to Keep and Scare Arms, which is hard to say, but this is the one that is kind of that Second Amendment one, with the Cowboys coming back to life after Lisa misinterprets. This is right up there with Night of the Living Zombies, where inexplicably all these dead historical figures were buried in Springfield. But I think Fight to Keep and Scare Arms is a little better. I think the awareness and the message they send is sharp because it's not really a Halloween piece, but it does have to do with scare. It also has to do with people getting tired of Homer Simpson traveling from the future, um, and I think that works really well. The next one is the Ned Zone. The Ned Zone is one of my favorites from 15. Send in the Clones from 13. This is higher on the list than I thought it would be too, but I think Send in the Clones is really important because it sets the tone for kind of these later Simpsons seasons where we get a music thing at the end of it and an unexpected twist. If you can't be with the one you love, be with the one you're with, I think is a great way to end a clone story. And giant notes from the sky are always fun. Terror at 5.5 feet from the Night Gallery episode, essentially. Treehouse of Horror 4 is a big part of what people kind of went back and watched Twilight Zone 4 to see what William Shatner did with that, I feel like. I think it gave a renaissance to it in a way that only The Simpsons could do. Heck House from 18. This is one of the Ned episodes, but this is also a really great intro where it shows that Lisa can be taken to a bad place that you don't expect. And I very much appreciate that. Um, and so Heck House, I think, is great because it has that Bosch reference, like I said earlier. But it's also really about Ned knowing the difference between good and evil. It's a lot about how Lisa will just kind of she will lose her values in order to go along. And there's a really great moment about her calling her a monster because she overfed Lenny's fish, and I think that's great. And we've got Citizen Kang. This is the one people like from Treehouse of Horror 7. This is that election episode with Kang and Kodos as Bob Dole and Bill Clinton. This is the one where everyone quotes, don't blame me, I voted for Kodos." This really is about the Simpsons' the Simpsons' ability to tell a story about apathy that works really well in a very short time period. Um, there's a lot of really great gags in it. It got outshined by a lot of things in this list. Clown Without Pity from Treehouse of Horror 3. This is the Talking Tina Twilight Zone episode. This is the one where there's a Crusty Doll with Evil. This is the one with the Frogurt shop. Um, this is a lot of the one people try to quote, but they can't because it's such a specific amount of dialogue. I can't even do it. But I think it's really cool. So Clown Without Pity is pretty good. I think it actually works better. Um, yeah, I think it works better. Clown Without Pity works better on its the first few minutes of it rather than the rest of it. So yeah. And then lastly on my list are E.T. Go Home, Night of the Dolphin, and Easy Bake Coven from 1811 and 8, respectively. That's my list of my top 23, everyone. Woo! I'm glad we all got through that together.
So, should we wrap up with our thoughts on Treehouse?
Yeah, I think I'll go and then you can kind of wrap up because I've talked a lot this
Mm,
episode. So I talked about the good. I think probably my least favorite season they did, and I'm going to talk about this, not tend on a negative note, but to talk about how when they do well, they do well. When they do bad, they really hit down.
mm,
Um, when I think about Treehouse of Horror 24, their Oh the Places You'll Go Dr. Seuss takedown and their beat for beat version of Freaks, which was
mm,
done better on American Horror Story Freak Show, which is not something I say very often about Ryan Murphy stuff, Lord knows. Um, when they don't hit, it really doesn't hit. There's something about their Cat in the Hat energy that is not pleasant.
mm,
And I think it was one of those things where they thought the source material was about chaos. That's not really what the Cat in the Hat is about.
mm,
In as they did it, and I think they tried. I think it's an interesting idea, but I think it aims for something it doesn't quite hit. And so like there are a lot of highs. Obviously, 23 segments out of all of them with nods to like four others. Um, there's more hits than misses. There's only a couple of seasons that are very low, a couple of segments that I've only watched once and never again. You know,
mm,
for the most part, it's a really good look at what makes horror for us, both as kids and as adults. And there's also something about the roles people play in horror. Marge in Treehouse of Horror isn't a nag, but she's always the cautious one. She's always the good one. She's rarely the one that participates in the violence. Um, and then everyone else just kind of devolves. So for me, I think Treehouse of Horror holds a really interesting place in horror canon because it's both a celebration of the anthology format, but it's also kind of something that is its own thing. And I want to hear your thoughts. So when this
mm.
goes up in archives, or you can talk to us on the Twitter or Instagram and tell us about your favorite Treehouse of Horror because this will come out the week of Halloween. So you'll be watching it. I know you will. And that's all I'm going to have to say with a minute left in the episode.
Mm. In, indeed. And I agree. At the end of the day, Treehouse of Horror, there has been some mediocre parts, but for the most part, it hits a lot of right notes, and there's a good reason why it's some of the most memorable moments from The Simpsons, and why people continue to go back to it and watch these over and over again during Halloween. Um, and yeah, I think people just love a good twisted tale at the end of the day.
And they do things like the opener from Treehouse of Horror 23, based on the Mayan calendar and the fear
Hmm.
that we were all going to die, was a really great opener. The opener with the 2008 election, McCain versus Obama, with the voting booth that murders Homer, is really great satire, and so it's kind of a joy and blessing. The curse is that when it goes bad, it goes bad, but the blessing is that when it's great, it's great.